My name is Joseph Shear. I am a retired musician. I teach music and violin to young people. I also make fishing rods, reels, flies, and dabble in the manufacture of fishing tackle of all kinds. I began collecting Pflueger fly reels in the 1980s under the tutelage of my dear friend, tackle mentor, and music lover, the late Martin Kane. We spent many hours sorting through fine fishing tackle at his home on the Concho River near Tanglewood, and Marty often teased me about my Pflueger obsession, telling me I should just buy one nice Edward von Hofe and focus on fine cane rods. But I stuck to my Pflueger reels and paired them up appropriately with lovely Hedden and Granger rods. I love the heft of the Hawkeye, the brilliance of the chrome Delite, the Art Deco sleekness of the Golden West. I went on to discover the Egalite, the Gem, the Medalist, and the 110 and 260 predecessors of the Hawkeye and Delite reels. As a member of ORCA, the Old Reel Collectors Association, I have access to a wonderful library of fishing tackle catalogs. Copies of the early Enterprise Pflueger catalogs are there to examine. I include a link below to the ORCA website and encourage collectors to join. It is worth the modest dues to have access to such a wealth of information, especially the near 500 catalogs in the ORCA library, stretching back to the origins of European and American fishing tackle. The forum and the Real News publication are icing on the cake. These YouTube shows are ancillary to my continuing book project, which is to survey the reels and the catalogs of Enterprise Pflueger from 1900 to 1935. In 1900, Enterprise Pflueger was a metal stamping and plating company, primarily making hooks, lures, and parts for harnesses and bridles, which are all collectible today. Enterprise Pflueger begins its real manufacturing in 1900. The how is quite confusing. According to the writing of author and lifetime ORCA member Steve Vernon, in an article for the Real News in July 2021, Enterprise Pflueger, before 1900, acquires tooling from Montague that has already been used to make reels for a variety of trade names like Climax, Empire City, Kosmic, and US Net and Twine. Montague was also using the same tooling beginning several years earlier in 1898. It is now known that this tooling is originally acquired by Montague from the decades-long career of Frederick Malleson, most famously of Conroy Bissett and Malleson, one of the preeminent rod and reel makers of the last quarter of the 19th century. Tooling for this purpose would have fit into Enterprise Pflueger's existing stamping and plating manufacturing expertise perfectly. Frederick Malleson, leaving the business after decades, creates opportunity for both Montague and Pflueger to fill a niche. It is not difficult to reverse engineer what these tools accomplished by looking at the parts themselves. I will delve into this tooling more deeply in later episodes. Most of Enterprise Pflueger's reel output will be stamped or pressed out of sheets. Screws are made in machines by the thousands. Most of these reels are not touched much, if at all, by human hands until the parts are assembled. Enterprise Pflueger also produces a few lines of handmade reels that for the time are shockingly expensive. More about one of those later in this episode. An exact timeline for this acquisition of tooling is not entirely clear. It has become apparent that in addition to the tooling, Enterprise Pflueger also acquired large numbers of leftover parts and entire leftover reels to get the operation up and running as quickly as possible. I use the term leftover to describe these parts and products because I believe they are left over from as far back as Malleson's earlier manufacturing, as well as Montague's own contributions starting in 1898. Some of these parts look a lot like parts that Enterprise Pflueger will ultimately make themselves, and some do not. The Enterprise Pflueger catalog of 1900 reflects this chaos. The catalog is being assembled during the latter half of 1899 and I wonder how they came up with pictures of the products they do not yet make. We know that the Malleson associate Frederick Moog has come to Enterprise Pflueger to oversee the reel manufacturing. And according to writing by Steve Brown, quoted by Steve Vernon in the Real News article of 2021, Malleson has undeliverable mail at Akron. I believe that the word undeliverable is the operative word there. Malleson is not in the best of health, and he returns to Brooklyn, where he passes away a year later, in 1901. We know Enterprise Pflueger has tools for Malleson and a trusted associate of Malleson in Moog to act as foreman, so it would make sense to picture in 1900 reels that had been previously made by the purchased tooling, and I believe that is what we see with the following caveats. I am certain that when the catalog was being assembled, Enterprise Pflueger did not know exactly what tooling they would receive. Several of the 1900 pictured reels are not made by Enterprise Pflueger, but by Montague alone. At least one pictures a version of the Moog foot that Enterprise Pflueger never makes, but Montague does. Enterprise Pflueger uses set patterns of screws that never change over the decades, so it is very strange to find such a menagerie of screw patterns in 1900. The 1900 catalog represents, to the best of Enterprise Pflueger's ability, the reels they might make, not the reels they will actually make. The first and best representation of what they actually make is in the 1904 catalog, which fortunately is also the most beautiful copy. This 1904 catalog is in the Harvard Library, and other early catalogs are unaccounted for, but we do have scans of the catalog reels at the York Library for download. What I'm describing here is the crux of the early Enterprise Pflueger identification problem. Three makers, Malleson, Montague, and Enterprise Pflueger, all using the same tooling over a span of a decade to make the same reels. This results in a lot of reels that all look very much alike. Multiply that by the number of trade names the three represent, and the confusion explodes exponentially. Given the lack of Enterprise Pflueger Company papers to provide us with information, due to the disposing of all company records at the sale of the company to Shakespeare, many writers have done an extraordinary job of beating the bushes for clues. The previously mentioned Steve Vernon, Dr. Todd Larson has written voluminously about Enterprise Pflueger. The beloved Robert Miller, author of several excellent books, and the fellow behind the Pflueger Facts column in the Real News, Orcus quarterly publication. I thank them all for their work in the field. Confusion plus a lack of concrete information has unfortunately led to speculation that my research into the physical reels repudiates. Evidence of this speculation is published in Dr. Todd Larson and Don Champion's book on Julius Hofe. They claim, without any evidence, that Julius Hofe made reels for Enterprise Pflueger to sell. Robert Miller, in his last book on bait casting reels, pictures a variety of reels made not by Enterprise Pflueger, but by the same tooling at Montague, and an even older, probably Malleson reel, and accepts them all as Enterprise Pflueger. I completely understand the mistake given their oft-stated lack of examples and the aforementioned lack of any significant paper trail from Enterprise Pflueger. Clearly, Robert Miller, Dr. Todd Larson, and Don Champion decide that Enterprise Pflueger did not make their own reels, but that others, such as Julius Hofe or Montague, where the tooling and parts came from, made some or all of the early reels for Enterprise Pflueger, in some kind of an arrangement of which we know nothing, and have zero evidence other than the observation that they all look alike. Breaking this relationship down, Montague does make all of the rods for Enterprise Pflueger at a later time, but that relationship is not in evidence in 1900 or 1904. That relationship is not germane in 1900. Enterprise Pflueger does probably sell hooks and lures to Montague. They are the largest manufacturer of hooks after all. Obviously, there is some relationship that results in the tooling being in both places, made more confusing by the existence of non-Enterprise Pflueger parts and, as mentioned before, complete non-Pflueger reels. But to get from there to Enterprise Pflueger not making their own reels is quite a leap logistically. The factories are hundreds of miles apart, and transportation is by train at best, horse otherwise. There is great difficulty in proving a poorly thought out hypothesis incorrect via a scanty or non existent paper trail. A self fulfilling prophecy emerges where the speculation is more powerful than common sense, especially when it gets published by otherwise reputable writers. Confusion reigns, and I am in the unenviable position of having to prove, rather absurdly, that Enterprise Pflueger made their own reels. I had my doubts about this speculation in each instance where I came across it, based on my 30 years' experience collecting hundreds of reels and other Enterprise Pflueger artifacts. I had already developed a simple tell of what an Enterprise Pflueger reel is as far back as 1988. A quick bit of personal history. Even as I joined Orca decades ago, I did not engage at all. I downloaded a lot of catalogs, every copy of the Real News back to inception. I bought a lot of books. I sometimes would go to the Real Talk pages and peruse conversations, but that's about it. I didn't really engage much. When I decided to tackle the question of who made the reels, I began to attend the national conventions and was surprised immediately by the extraordinary range of reels that the Orca membership accepts as Enterprise Pflueger. Confusion reigns indeed. I noticed a theme of sorts in the writing about Enterprise Pflueger reels, concerning the lack of examples. Robert Miller devotes entire Real News articles to phantom Pfluegers, and even more illuminating, Don Champion writes in the Real News article of November 2004 that he has never seen the cast foot on an Enterprise Pflueger reel, even as the 1904 catalog has them pictured on all of the nicer reels. The article is about click mechanisms, but this statement about the cast foot is telling. Don Champion attributes all reels with cast feet directly to Montague, and I have since identified dozens of Enterprise Pflueger reels with cast feet. I believe in this one article I can pinpoint the flaw in the Champion-Larson-Miller Enterprise Pflueger belief system. They identify actual Enterprise Pflueger products as Montague incorrectly. Once that is possible, then an avalanche of makers is possible, like Julius vom Hofe or Hendricks. Anyone can obfuscate ad infinitum in that scenario. I decided a few years ago on a relatively simple solution to this overarching question of who made Enterprise Pflueger reels. Find the reels and let them tell their story. I now have found at least one example of around 90% of every catalog reel from 1900 to the end of the maroon box in the mid-1930s. The most difficult to find are the handful of reels that are discontinued before 1907, and I'll delve into those in another episode. Any early cheap reel is also super rare. They get scooped up in metal drives before the wars. Often what survives are smaller 40 and 60 yard reels. The larger ones are targets of the quite invasive and demanding metal drivers. One drive I've documented in Ohio had a goal of 100 pounds for every citizen of the state, and happily achieved 104 pounds per person. I'm afraid that represents a lot of reels. High-end reels are also rare, having much lower production numbers originally, but in all likelihood enjoying better appreciation and care as expensive handmade items. The cost of an Enterprise Pflueger Akron reel, the non-level wind, in 1906 is $25, which today represents almost $1,000. For the time, the handmade Enterprise Pfluegers are very expensive. I believe that prior to 1916, Enterprise Pflueger production numbers are considerably lower relative to other comparable makers like Montague, Julius vom Hofe, or Hendricks, but this is anecdotal, just my observation of what is generally available for sale on any given day. So how does one decide what is an Enterprise Pflueger product at all, given this chaos? I like open-mindedness, but science and history require discipline. So I started with a few ground rules. I start with the 1904 catalog reels and their measurements. By 1904, Enterprise Pflueger has been making the reels for 3 years. The 1904 catalog represents what they are making, what they made, and what they will make for a decade or more, with a few additions. I use these catalog pictures and measurements to develop a DNA for the different designs, and from there I divide all of the reels into families of like reels to describe them in my book. I have approached this from a reel design perspective, the basic premise here being that if they are not in the catalog, Enterprise Pflueger did not make them. Thus, they are not Enterprise Pflueger, but should be correctly identified by the actual maker, Montague, or earlier Malleson-related trade names like Kosmic, US Net and Twine, Climax, or Empire City. I have never seen one of these early non-catalog reels stamped Pflueger. I will state that even as they are making the same reels with the identical tools, I believe that Enterprise Pflueger is separating from the others visually on the reels. Their earliest products, perhaps as early as 1901, are stamped Pflueger on top of some of the curved stamped feet, always on their most inexpensive reels, not on better reels. I have not seen this Pflueger stamped foot on a number 260 reel, for instance. This is depicted in 1904 in the catalog and begins to disappear before 1907. Why do that if you're trying to blend in? The preferred click design, diagonal, is established in an informational article by Edward vom Hofe in his 1883 catalog, and everyone follows this prescription, except Enterprise Pflueger. I have a few examples of reels made by this same tooling before it gets to either Montague or Enterprise Pflueger. Marked Empire City, they have a 9:3 click design. They are obviously earlier Malleson products. The click at 9:3 exists in the Malleson history. It cannot be accidental that Enterprise Pflueger ignore Edward vom Hofe and use a 9:3 straight across design. This simple detail is true in every reel that is not a Progress or a Portage Topic 123. The exceptions that are pictured in the catalog in 1906 are never made that way. I believe that Enterprise Pflueger is continuing a tradition begun in 1900. If you don't have the reel you're going to make, just find one somebody else makes and picture it to generate sales, until you can picture the reel you finally make. This situation exists in 1906 in the standard top hat reel and the 2000 series reel. The 1906 pictured standard reel is 100% the Montague product. An attractive reel with its fancy foot and cosmic style handle. Montague makes lots of these all along since 1898. My examination of both versions reveals that they are exactly the same in measurements. Enterprise Pflueger even emulate the fancy foot of the Montague, but all other parts are 100% Pflueger. Even as in both 1906 and 1907, the standard is pictured with a diagonal click. All known examples are 9:3. I have no explanation as to why this reel does not appear earlier in the history. The only discernible unique part is the one-piece cap. Clearly Montague and Enterprise Pflueger have the same tool to make that unique one-piece cap. Enterprise Pflueger introduced a number of new designs in 1906. The Peerless and Victor reels also use a cross-brace design. The 570 and 580 reels also appear in 1906, and the 570 is pictured with a diagonal click in 06 and with a 9:3 click in 07. I believe that they had the ability to make these reels all along. All of the Enterprise Pflueger examples of these reels have a 9:3 click. The 2000 series reel pictured in 1906 is also a Montague product. Montague is making a version of this well before 1906. They also make a version with a free spool lever on the front plate. When the 1907 catalog appears, the Enterprise Pflueger product is completely different, with an offset metal disc and a reverse metal-bound design that will become the design of all the large saltwater reels from Dixie to Cuyahoga. And they will all have a 9-3 click. It would be difficult to think they're the same reel at all, except for the same catalog numbers. It's the same reel in Enterprise Pflueger's estimation. I am quite certain that the overwhelmingly predominant sliding click design on Enterprise Pflueger reels is 9-3. The only early sliding click exception is the Progress, which has a sliding click at 6-12, and the only diagonal click is on the later Portage Topic 1-3. I can illustrate this a step further in these three number 400 series reels, which are ubiquitous as Montagues and others, but surprisingly rare as Enterprise Pfluegers. The same Steve Vernon article in the Reel News discusses the difficulty of identifying the makers of this style of reel, which everyone seemed to manufacture. I wrote to Steve about these three number 400 series reels from the collection to describe how it is possible to identify the Enterprise Pflueger versions. One of these reels has a Cuyahoga medallion and a 9-3 click. Another 400 series reel marked Pflueger in an arc over patented, having again the 9-3 click design. And the third, number 400 reel, is an oddity, having side plates of an early butterscotch-colored plastic, very much like the Montague Manitoba reels in brilliant green. It is 100% Enterprise Pflueger, though, having the 9-3 click design. The Cuyahoga medallion reel is simply a late, probably discontinued 400 series that for whatever reason becomes a Cuyahoga before the actual or new Cuyahoga is introduced, and it would stretch credulity to think that any other 400 series reel would be any different in click design. Enterprise Pflueger have been stamping these out exactly the same for 15 years. Interestingly, the number 400 catalog number is assigned to the new Cuyahoga design, so having the medallion is prescient. These are the only three 400 series reels I have found. There are secondary means of establishing Enterprise Pflueger identity, which involve comparisons of parts with known Enterprise Pflueger reels. Patent evidence, such as the spool patent, the sandwich plate patent, other proprietary details, such as the distinctive curved stamped foot, the threading of oil caps, interior details like the slotted quadruple gear, or the click spring and attachment method. In closing for this episode, the main identifying traits are: beginning in 1904, the catalog pictures and measurements are gold and truly represent what Enterprise Pflueger has already made, is currently making, and will make for more than a decade, with significant additions along the way. The sliding click is always 9-3, except on the Progress, which is 6-12. Fixed click reels are always 6-12. The only diagonal click is the Portage Topic 1-3. Weird one, that. I will address some of the more difficult combinations of traits in my next episode, where I will describe the discovery and attribution of an early, unmarked Enterprise Pflueger 250-yard light salmon reel. I want to thank Andrew Wheeler and Jen Ripple from Pure Fishing for their kind consideration and encouragement. I want to thank the many dedicated collectors and historians working on this history before me. My brother in this is Kevin Hambright, who I believe has looked into the guts of more reels than anyone, and who seeks honest history with as much passion and dedication as myself. Kevin is the source of many of the rarest and finest examples in the collection. I also want to thank Steve Vernon for his writing, and I am most grateful for his advice and encouragement. I also thank Dr. Todd Larson and Robert Miller, of course, David Lehman, Craig Barber, Robin Salem, Steve Brown, and pretty much the entire cadre of Orca who are so encouraging and have provided me with so many examples of the reals. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you next time.